In some sports, controversies come in the way of whether or not a computer these days is better equipped to police a game than 3 dudes running around with flags and whistles. But when it comes down to a combat sport like mixed martial arts, UFC in the most particular, with millions upon millions in investment, profits, even fight of the night bonuses, where fighters are dedicating their potential 25 minutes to a life-changing experience that hopefully might bring them that element of glory. You can imagine things get very tense, very quick, moving from tepid to boiling point in a matter of moments. Whether or not that's due to seeing red, like the bride in Kill Bill in a moment of madness, or just a miscalculated decision by one of the ringside officials. Sorry guys. Yeah, we can tell how things get tense very, very quick, and that tension soon turns into controversy. So let's have a look at 5 of the most controversial moments in the UFC. Number 5, KHABIB Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. We've seen some truly epic wars in the octagon, normally played out by strong characteristics and stubborn dudes with skill sets that are second to none who will not move an inch. Unfortunately though, when those characteristics fall out of an unsanctioned bout, it can end up in situations which make us all look bad. And needless to say, the venom between Conor and KHABIB grew more and more potent over the years. Whether that's KHABIB calling Conor Burger King or chicken, or Conor offering the devout Muslim his custom brand of alcohol, disrespecting his family and his religion. But things took a particular spike for the worst when Conor threw that dolly through the coach window full of UFC fighters, injuring fighters like Ray Borg and Michael Chiesa, who later had to pull out of fights due to lacerations and other such injuries. However, that was only an ugly sign of more things to come, and the scenes of KHABIB flying from the octagon to battle Dylan Dallas, or Conor swinging at KHABIB's coaches and teammates from the octagon wall will forever be a dark day on the UFC. Both world-class fighters were served with lengthy bans and hefty fines whilst being admonished by the UFC brass. And unfortunately, we saw fans amongst the arena fighting between each other in scuffles that were uploaded to the internet for days and days after. In hindsight, that was just a snippet of the reality that surrounds our sport. We are thankful that nobody was injured and that the fight only lasted for a minute or so, but it reminds us that we all need to carry a little bit of sportsmanship with the way that we do things around this full contact business. Number 4, Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler. Referees have the hardest job in the game bar the fighters. They're in charge of policing the law in a shootout. Now, things like eye gouging and low blows are something that we might expect to be obvious, though even me and you can miss it if we don't catch a replay or two sometimes. And those decisions are just tip of the iceberg. It's actually the things that we don't see that actually earn the big fish, like John McCarthy, Dan Miragliotta and Herb Dean, the titles of the best in the world. They've gone from not being able to stop the fight for anything short of a finish to literally being on the front line, helping to save these fighters from themselves. When Ben Askren entered the UFC, stakes were incredibly high. We was hoping to get the answer to, can this undefeated wrestling phenom take on the best in the world? But feeding him to a guy like Robbie Lawler immediately was quite a bit of a welcoming party, especially in the first few moments of that fight, where Robbie had Ben battered and bloody, but only to see Ben turn around the position and choke Robbie out. Apparently. So as Ben celebrates, probably quite a bit relieved that he wasn't actually finished in those first instances, we see Robbie Lawler pop straight back up to protest the decision with the awareness you just don't see from a fighter who was unconscious a moment ago. Now, in later conversations, Herb has conceded the idea that maybe Robbie wasn't completely out at the time. However, there are certain things that he needs to take into account which me and you might not be that interested in the moment of madness. For instance, the type of submission and the effect that it will have on a fighter's long-term health are absolutely paramount. These are just things that this guy is there to make sure are taken care of. Now, obviously, Robbie's pretty pissed. He just lost a fight. No matter which way you lose a fight, you're probably not going to be happy about it. Robbie gracefully offered his apologies to Herb Dean after the fight, stating on the mic how it is extremely difficult in their shoes to make tough decisions look good to us bunch of bloodthirsty pedestrians. Number 3, Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal. Similar to refs, ringside physicians have a particularly unfavorable job. Anytime you see them, alarm bells are ringing off, as they have the ability to stop the fight in what's normally an unfavorable fashion. The only time that they receive a pop from the crowd is when they say that a fighter can continue and they pretty much didn't need to be in the ring in the first place. As you might imagine, when Nate and Jorge talked their way into that fight at MSG for a bout that they literally created out of thin air, the MMA media went nuts and of course started predicting the way that that fight might turn out. As MASVIDAL had been knocking people out left, right and centre, Darren Till and Ben Askren come to mind, versus that legendary DIAZ cardio. Cardio which unfortunately didn't come to fruition because of a kick which hit Nate in the noggin, split him wide open, bringing the doctor in to inspect and subsequently finish the fight right there and then. Obviously, moments like this is not what fans pay their hard-earned cash to come and see. And it's not how you want to finish a fight on the main card at the combat mecca for this new bout. However, I don't really fancy seeing somebody's skull popping out of their face. I mean, call me squeamish if you will. Yeah, I'm a big man, I can take it. But the fact of the matter is, Jorge caused that injury, not through mistake, but through technique. And throughout the fight, he had been wounding Nate. He had dropped him. He had been making him bend and stretch in ways that I'm sure Nate wasn't really interested in going. And the cardio is legendary, yes. DIAZ rises to the occasion in those championship rounds, and it did look like MASVIDAL was fading. However, we need DIAZ to get to those stages, maybe bloodied, maybe battered, but at least in one full piece. There are reasons why they call them undisputed championships rather than doctor's decisions championships. Sorry, doc. Number 2, Jon Jones versus Matt Hamill. MMA has been a great vehicle for dispelling a lot of misconceptions in the combat game. Now, we know that wrestling and BJJ is a great way to be able to control where a fight goes. And we also know that the dog with the biggest bark doesn't necessarily have the strongest bite. Though some misconceptions, unfortunately, have slipped through. Not everything is perfect. And unfortunately, one is stained on the ledger of the youngest UFC champion, Johnny Bones Jones' record. I mean, come on. To this day, Jon Jones is still undefeated, even though he does have that loss to Matt Hamill, but no one's gonna argue that he wasn't winning that fight. The dude was ahead on the scorecards by 45 strikes to 5. However, due to this illegal strike called the 12-6 elbow, the ref was forced to stop the fight, and hence the blemish. The story goes that while I was witnessing mixed martial arts seminars back in the good old days, commissions saw demonstrations of martial artists breaking wood and bricks, concrete, all of that good stuff with their elbows with this same type of motion, and it was deemed that it was too lethal for the fight game. But the questions that we ask now aloud today is that how is a vertical elbow from your knees more impactful than that head kick that Kevin Lee threw to KO Gregor Gillespie just gone? Or, for instance, over in Bellator, that flying knee that MVP cracked the skull of Cyborg with. But you don't win fights, you don't get decisions overturned by just being a tattletale, sir, he did this. Unfortunately, the rule still stands, and so does the only loss on the greatest lightweight champion in the UFC's history.
And number 1, Colby Covington versus the world.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but mixed martial arts contests are predicated on the idea that we're watching reality play out in front of our very eyes. Now, the skill sets, the world-class talent which is on display is absolutely no joke, no mistake, and it's been accumulated through years upon years of drilling, miles upon miles of running, and an endurance of punishment that is otherworldly. However, let's not forget that another name for this thing is called prize fighting, and it takes a certain element of showmanship to get over or to keep their eyes on you. Now, take the curious case of Colby Covington, the fella that was winning, doing well for himself, but told that his fight style was too unattractive, too uninteresting, and that they wasn't going to renew his contract, forcing him to try and make a bigger splash by creating a character that fans would want to watch. What materialized was a heavily disrespectful and almost playground level of bullying, coined by terms like nerd bashing, trolling fans on Twitter with movie spoilers, and a bunch load of other party tricks to keep the eyes on him. The most fascinating thing about this worked character was that up until this point, he hadn't faced any adversity that the guy couldn't handle. Obviously, until we ran into Kamaru Usman in that title fight loss. Before then, though, he gathered the attention of the United States president, fans and haters around the world alike, and kept his place as an ultimate fighter. It can't be coincidental that during this run, Colby made a couple of appearances on professional fighting shows as a heel, as you'd imagine. He took those sentiments back with him to the octagon, as he would cuss and berate fans after wins for very little, to be honest. He'd pick fights with competitors in weight classes way out of his realm and just generally try and trigger everyone. Yet at the same time, those who knew Chaos would tell you a story about a completely different guy, saying that he was pretty cool and down to earth behind closed doors, whilst other folks who had lost favor with him over the years was saying that that persona was 100% fake, my dude. It's almost spooky to think that there are hundreds of fighters deep down in the rankings across the divisions in the UFC who might be looking to bring their own avatars to life in the same way that Colby's South push has got him to where he's at today. I mean, the decade is still very young, people. And that's our list. Be sure to fly and armbar us down in the comments though with any of your controversial moments from the UFC. Again, as mentioned, a little bit of sportsmanship from everybody involved would be appreciated. We'll be right back here for lists, news, and everything MMA and UFC right here on What Culture Combat. Until then though, see you on the mats.